After being falsely accused of theft by a ruthless millionaire, a humble housemaid is taken to trial without a lawyer, with no evidence to prove her innocence and seemingly no way out. In court, all seems lost, until, unexpectedly, the millionaire's own triplets burst into the courtroom with a shocking truth. Before we start, if you'd like, you can tell us which country you're watching from. Please hit the like button if you're enjoying this content, and subscribe to our channel to stay updated. The mahogany gavel echoed through courtroom 7B like a death knell, each strike driving Maria Santos deeper into despair. She sat alone at the defendant's table, her calloused hands trembling as she smoothed her only good dress, the black one she wore to church every Sunday. Today, it felt like funeral attire. The defendant, Maria Santos, stands accused of grand theft in the first degree, Judge Harrison announced, his voice cutting through the sterile air. Allegedly stealing a family heirloom valued at $200,000 from the Wellington estate. Maria's breath caught. 200,000. The number still felt impossible, surreal. She'd never even seen that much money in her entire 34 years of life. Across the aisle, Charles Wellington sat with his team of 3 attorneys, each one costing more per hour than Maria made in a month. The 52-year-old real estate mogul wore a custom Italian suit that probably cost more than her annual rent. His steel gray hair was perfectly styled, his jaw set in righteous indignation. Every inch of him screamed power, wealth, and untouchable authority. "Mr. Wellington," the prosecutor began, rising with theatrical precision, "please tell the court about the defendant's employment in your household." Wellington stood slowly, his 6'2" frame commanding attention. "Your Honor, Maria Santos worked as our live-in housekeeper for 18 months. We trusted her completely. She had access to every room in our home, including my private study where I kept the Beaumont sapphire." Maria's lawyer, if the overworked public defender could even be called that, barely looked up from his notes. James Miller had met with her exactly once for 15 minutes in a cramped room that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. He'd been honest, at least. "The evidence is overwhelming. Consider pleading guilty for a reduced sentence." But Maria couldn't plead guilty, not when she had Sophia waiting for her. Her 6-year-old daughter sat in the gallery's front row with Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor who'd agreed to watch her during the trial. Sophia's dark eyes, so much like Maria's own, were wide with confusion and fear. She didn't understand why Mama was sitting at that scary table, why people were saying such awful things about her. "The defendant had complete access to my study," Wellington continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "The safe was opened using the combination which only 3 people knew: myself, my late wife Catherine, and our children, who are too young to remember such numbers." "And when did you discover the theft?" the prosecutor prompted. "Last Tuesday evening. I went to retrieve the sapphire for insurance appraisal and it was gone. I immediately checked the household staff schedules. Maria was the only one with access during the relevant time frame." Wellington's performance was flawless. His voice cracked slightly when he mentioned his late wife. Catherine had died 2 years ago in a car accident, leaving him to raise their 7-year-old triplets alone. The jury ate it up. A grieving widower, a faithful servant's betrayal, a priceless family heirloom. It was a story that practically prosecuted itself. "I trusted her," Wellington said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the courtroom. "After Catherine's death, Maria wasn't just an employee. She helped care for my children. Emma, Lucas, and Oliver adored her. That's what makes this betrayal so devastating." Maria bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. The triplets had indeed adored her. Emma with her wild curls and infectious giggle, always begging Maria to braid her hair. Lucas, quiet and thoughtful, who would sneak into the kitchen to help her bake cookies. Oliver, the little artist, constantly drawing pictures of rainbows and butterflies to give her. She'd loved those children like her own. After losing their mother, they'd clung to any maternal figure, and Maria had gladly filled that role. She'd read them bedtime stories, kissed scraped knees, and held them when nightmares came calling. And now their father was destroying her life. The defendant's financial situation was desperate, the prosecutor continued, pulling Maria back to the nightmare unfolding around her. Single mother, minimum wage job, mounting medical bills for her daughter's asthma treatments. The motive is clear, Your Honor. Maria's hands clenched in her lap. Yes, money was tight. It always had been. But she'd never ever stolen anything. Not a candy bar as a child, not a penny from Wellington's desk, not even food from his elaborate pantry when Sophia was hungry and their own cupboards were bare. Mr. Miller, Judge Harrison said, does your client wish to make a statement? The public defender glanced at Maria with tired eyes. They'd been through this. Anything she said would only make things worse. Wellington's lawyers would tear her apart, expose every struggle, every unpaid bill, every desperate moment of her life. No, Your Honor, Miller said quietly. The defense rests. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. That was it? No witnesses called, no evidence presented, no fight at all. She was being fed to the wolves and her own lawyer was opening the gate. Wellington's legal team had painted a picture of an ungrateful servant who repaid kindness with theft. They had surveillance footage showing Maria entering and leaving the study, routine cleaning that now looked sinister through their lens. They had financial records proving her desperation. They had the missing sapphire and Maria's fingerprints on the safe. What they didn't have was the truth. But truth, Maria was learning, was a luxury she couldn't afford. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, their faces told the story before the foreman even spoke. We find the defendant guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted. Sophia's scream of "Mama!" pierced through the chaos. Maria felt the world tilt sideways, her vision blurring as the weight of the verdict crashed down on her. Guilty. She was going to prison. Sophia would go into foster care. Everything they'd built, their tiny apartment, their Sunday morning pancakes, their bedtime stories, all of it was being ripped away. Sentencing is scheduled for next Friday, Judge Harrison announced. The defendant will remain in custody until that time. As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Maria turned toward Sophia one last time. Her daughter was sobbing, reaching over Mrs. Chen's restraining arms. I love you, mija, Maria whispered, her voice breaking. Always remember that Mama loves you. The metal cuffs clicked into place, cold and final. As she was led away, Maria caught Wellington's eye. For just a moment, she thought she saw something flicker across his face. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but something else entirely. Guilt? Regret? But then his mask slipped back into place and Maria was dragged toward a future that felt like falling into an endless, dark hole. The county jail's visiting room smelled of industrial disinfectant and desperation. Maria sat across from Sophia, separated by scratched plexiglass that made everything look distorted, broken. They spoke through phones that crackled with static, adding another layer of distance to an already impossible situation. When are you coming home, Mama? Sophia asked for the 100th time, her small hand pressed against the glass. Dark circles rimmed her eyes. She hadn't been sleeping well since the trial. Soon, baby, Maria lied, her heart shattering with each word. Mrs. Chen is taking good care of you, right? Sophia nodded, but her lip trembled. She makes different pancakes, not like yours. And she doesn't know the song about the little bird. The little bird song. Maria had made it up years ago. A silly tune about a bird who flew so high it could touch the stars. Sophia had demanded it every night before bed. Such a small thing, but it represented everything Maria was losing. Mrs. Chen is very nice, Maria said carefully. And remember what we talked about being brave? Like the little bird? Exactly like the little bird. But Maria didn't feel brave. She felt like she was drowning, pulled under by currents she couldn't control. The sentencing hearing was tomorrow. Her lawyer had prepared her for the worst, 5 to 7 years minimum. Sophia would be 10 when Maria got out. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that her mother will miss her entire childhood? I drew you a picture, Sophia said, holding up a sheet of paper to the glass. It showed 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. That's you and me, and we're flying like the little bird. Maria pressed her hand against the glass, aligning it with Sophia's tiny palm. It's beautiful, mija. The most beautiful picture in the world. When visiting time ended, Maria was escorted back to her cell. She lay on the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. 18 months ago, she'd responded to an ad for a live-in housekeeper. The pay was generous, the room provided was clean and comfortable, and Sophia could visit on weekends. It seemed like a miracle after years of struggling to make ends meet. Charles Wellington had been professional during the interview, distant but fair. His children were still raw from their mother's death, and he needed someone reliable to help maintain the household while he traveled for business. The Wellington estate was like something from a magazine: sprawling grounds, crystal chandeliers, artwork worth more than most people's houses. Maria had felt intimidated at first, terrified of breaking something priceless. But gradually she'd found her rhythm. She'd grown to love the work. There was something satisfying about maintaining such a beautiful space, about bringing order and cleanliness to rooms filled with history and luxury. And the children, they'd needed her desperately. Emma, Lucas, and Oliver had been lost souls when she arrived. 7 years old and motherless, they'd wandered the huge house like ghosts. Emma, the only girl, tried to be strong for her brothers, but would sometimes lock herself in her room and sob. Lucas had stopped talking almost entirely, communicating only in nods and headshakes. Oliver drew constantly, but only in black crayon, dark, stormy pictures that broke Maria's heart. Slowly, patiently, Maria had drawn them out. She'd taught Emma to braid her own hair, helped Lucas build elaborate Lego castles, and introduced Oliver to colors beyond black. She'd made them laugh again, had seen light return to their eyes. Mr. Wellington had noticed the change. "I don't know what you've done," he'd said one evening, finding Maria reading bedtime stories to all 3 children piled onto Lucas's bed. "But they haven't been this happy since Catherine died. Thank you." It was the closest thing to warmth she'd ever seen from him. So what had changed? What had turned appreciation into accusation, trust into betrayal? The Beaumont sapphire. Maria had seen it exactly once, 3 months ago, when Mr. Wellington had shown it to a potential buyer who'd come to the house. It was stunning. A deep blue stone the size of a walnut surrounded by diamonds, set in an ornate silver pendant. Wellington had handled it with reverent care, explaining its history. "It belonged to my great-great-grandmother," he'd said. "She brought it from France when she immigrated to America. It's been passed down through 5 generations of Wellington women. Catherine wore it on our wedding day." Maria had admired it politely, but that was all. She'd never even touched it, never been alone with it, never had any reason to go near the safe where it was kept. Yet somehow, she was the only logical suspect when it went missing. The next morning brought no comfort, only the crushing reality of sentencing day. Maria was led back to courtroom 7B, where Judge Harrison would determine how many years of Sophia's life she would miss. The gallery was mostly empty this time. Mrs. Chen sat in the back with Sophia, who wore her best dress, the blue one Maria had bought for her 6th birthday. Wellington was present with his legal team, looking appropriately solemn for the cameras that had shown up to document the conclusion of the wealthy businessman versus thieving maid story. "Before I announce the sentence," Judge Harrison began, "I want to address the defendant directly. Ms. Santos, you had an opportunity to take responsibility, to show remorse, to make this easier on everyone involved, including your daughter. You chose instead to maintain your innocence despite overwhelming evidence. While I understand the temptation to lie when facing serious consequences, your lack of accountability troubles me deeply." Maria stood, her legs barely supporting her weight. She wanted to scream, to protest, to demand that someone, anyone, believe her. But she knew it would only make things worse. "Therefore," Judge Harrison continued, "I sentence you to 6 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 4 years contingent on good behavior and demonstrated rehabilitation." 6 years. The number echoed in Maria's head as the courtroom spun around her. Sophia would be 12 when she got out. 12 years old. She would miss Sophia's first day of school, her first lost tooth, her first friendship drama, her first heartbreak. All of it gone. Behind her, she could hear Sophia crying, the sound cutting through everything else like a blade. Mrs. Chen was trying to comfort her, but how do you comfort a child whose world has just collapsed? As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Maria turned for one last look at her daughter. Through her tears, she mouthed the words, "I love you," and tried to memorize Sophia's face, tried to burn this moment into her memory so she could carry it through the dark years ahead. But as she turned back toward her fate, something caught her eye. Wellington was looking toward the back of the courtroom, his face pale, his usual composure cracking. Maria followed his gaze and saw them. 3 small figures in the hallway beyond the courtroom doors. Emma, Lucas, and Oliver Wellington, still in their school uniforms, faces pressed against the glass like prisoners looking in. They weren't supposed to be there. Wellington had specifically kept them away from the trial, claiming he wanted to protect them from the ugliness. But there they were, and the expression on their father's face when he saw them was unlike anything Maria had ever witnessed. Not the righteous anger of a wronged employer, not the satisfaction of justice served. It was fear. Pure, undiluted fear. The children's faces haunted Maria through her first week in prison. During her sleepless nights in the narrow cell, she replayed that moment over and over. The way Wellington's composure had cracked when he saw his triplets, the terror that had flashed across his features. Why would seeing his own children fill him with fear? Maria had been assigned to laundry duty, a mind-numbing routine of sorting, washing, and folding that gave her too much time to think. The other inmates mostly left her alone. She was quiet, kept to herself, and posed no threat to anyone. But her cellmate, Diane, was different. Diane Rodriguez had been a paralegal before her conviction for embezzlement. She was sharp, cynical, and had an uncanny ability to read people. After watching Maria cry herself to sleep for the 3rd night in a row, she'd finally spoken up. "You didn't do it, did you?" Maria had looked up from her bunk, surprised. "What?" "Whatever they got you for, you didn't do it." "How can you tell?" Diane had laughed, a sound without humor. "Honey, I've been around criminals my whole career and now I live with them. You don't have the look. Real thieves, we sleep fine. It's the innocent ones who can't rest." Over the following days, Maria found herself talking to Diane. Really talking for the first time since her arrest. She told her about the sapphire, about Wellington, about the children she'd grown to love. "Tell me about this boss of yours," Diane said during one of their late-night conversations. "What was he really like?" Maria considered the question carefully. Cold, professional, but not cruel exactly. Just distant. Like he was afraid to let anyone get too close. Even his own kids? Especially his own kids. The words came out before Maria could stop them, but once spoken, she realized their truth. He loved them, I think, but it was like he didn't know how to show it. After their mother died, he threw himself into work even more. The children barely saw him. And when he did see them, Maria closed her eyes, remembering. He was gentle with them, but careful, like they were made of glass and might shatter if he touched them too firmly. Sometimes I'd catch him watching them from doorways, but when they noticed him, he'd disappear. Sounds like a man carrying guilt. Guilt about what? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Diane's words stayed with Maria as the days blended into weeks. She started paying more attention to the news coverage of her case, watching the small television in the common room whenever Wellington appeared. He'd done several interviews, always perfectly composed, always saying the right things about trust and betrayal. But now Maria watched with different eyes, looking for cracks in the facade. And she found them. During an interview with Channel 7 News, when asked about his children, Wellington's jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. Emma, Lucas, and Oliver are resilient. They're learning that people aren't always who they seem to be. But his hands, Maria noticed, had been shaking. In another interview, when the reporter mentioned how Maria had helped care for the children, Wellington had cut the question short. "We don't discuss my children's private lives. They've been through enough." The pattern emerged slowly. Wellington could talk about the theft, the betrayal, the violation of trust, but any mention of his children in relation to Maria made him visibly uncomfortable. "He's hiding something," Maria told Diane one evening. "Of course he is. Rich men don't destroy their housekeepers over jewelry unless there's more to the story. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" That question followed Maria into her second month of imprisonment. What could she do? She had no resources, no allies, no way to investigate from inside a prison cell. Her appeals had been automatically filed, but everyone involved expected them to fail. The evidence against her was too strong, too clean, too perfect. Too perfect. The thought struck her during laundry duty one Tuesday morning. She'd been folding the same shirt 3 times, her mind elsewhere, when the phrase echoed in her head. Too perfect. Real crimes were messy. There were mistakes, oversights, contradictions. But the case against Maria had been airtight from the beginning. Every piece of evidence had fallen into place like pieces of a puzzle, each one supporting the narrative of a desperate servant stealing from her employer. But what if someone had been arranging those pieces? That evening, Maria asked to use the phone. The calls were monitored, recorded, but she needed to hear Sophia's voice. Mrs. Chen answered as always, with patient kindness. "She's doing better," Mrs. Chen assured her. "Still sad, but she's eating more. Made a friend at school, a little boy named Tommy." When Sophia came to the phone, her voice was small but stronger than it had been. "Mama, I miss you. I miss you too, baby. More than all the stars in the sky. Mrs. Chen says you're sick, that's why you have to stay in the hospital. When will you be better?" Maria's heart clenched. Mrs. Chen was trying to protect Sophia from the ugly truth, but eventually the girl would understand. "I don't know, mija, but I promise you, I promise with all my heart, that I will come home to you. Promise like the little bird? Promise like the little bird." After hanging up, Maria sat in the common room staring at nothing. Around her, other inmates watched television, played cards, lived their lives within the narrow confines of the prison routine. But Maria felt suspended between worlds, no longer part of the outside, not yet resigned to the inside. Somewhere out there, Sophia was growing up without her. Somewhere out there, Emma, Lucas, and Oliver Wellington were living with whatever secret their father was hiding. And somewhere out there, the truth was waiting to be discovered. The question was whether anyone cared enough to look for it. That night, as she lay on her narrow bunk listening to Diane's steady breathing, Maria made a decision. She couldn't investigate from inside prison, but there had to be someone on the outside who would listen. Someone who would look past Wellington's money and influence to see the inconsistencies in his story. She just had to figure out who that someone might be. The answer came from an unexpected source the next morning. A new inmate arrived, a young woman named Jessica who'd been arrested for identity theft. During intake processing, Maria overheard her talking to another prisoner. "My sister's a reporter for the Tribune," Jessica was saying. "She's always looking for stories about people getting screwed by the system." A reporter. Someone whose job was to ask difficult questions, to dig beneath surface narratives, to find the truth hidden in shadows. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. And for the first time since her arrest, Maria felt a flicker of hope. The little bird, she thought, might just learn to fly after all. Sarah Mitchell had been a reporter for the Chicago Tribune for 8 years, long enough to recognize a story with holes when she saw one. Jessica's letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning, handwritten on prison stationery, asking her to look into her cellmate's case. "Another innocent prisoner claims," Sarah had muttered initially, tossing the letter aside. But something about the details nagged at her. A live-in housekeeper with 18 months of exemplary service suddenly stealing a family heirloom? A single mother with no criminal history risking everything for one score? It felt wrong. Now sitting in her car outside the Wellington estate, Sarah studied the imposing structure through telephoto lens. Charles Wellington had agreed to the interview reluctantly, only after she'd mentioned writing a piece about employer security and domestic service situations. The mansion was everything Jessica's letter had described: sprawling, intimidating, designed to showcase wealth and power. But it was the playground equipment visible in the backyard that caught Sarah's attention. Swings, a slide, a sandbox, all clearly expensive, but also clearly unused. No toys scattered around, no signs of children actually playing. "Ms. Mitchell?" A woman in a crisp uniform answered the front door. "Mr. Wellington is waiting in his study." Sarah followed her through halls lined with oil paintings and crystal fixtures. Everything was perfect, museum quality, sterile. Not a single family photo, no children's artwork stuck to refrigerators, no signs that actual kids lived here. Charles Wellington rose from behind a massive mahogany desk as she entered. He was exactly as she'd expected from the news coverage, tall, distinguished, radiating controlled authority. But there was something brittle about his composure, like porcelain under pressure. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming, though I must say I'm not sure what new angle there could be on such a straightforward case. Just trying to understand how employers can protect themselves," Sarah said smoothly, setting up her recorder. "May I ask about your children? I understand they formed an attachment to Ms. Santos." Wellington's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My children are resilient. They understand that sometimes people we trust disappoint us. But they must have been confused. A woman they saw as a maternal figure suddenly arrested for theft. How did you explain it to them?" "I prefer not to discuss my children's private experiences with the media." Sarah had interviewed enough defensive subjects to recognize deflection. She tried a different approach. "The theft occurred while you were away on business. Who discovered the missing sapphire?" "I did when I returned Tuesday evening. But according to the police report, you called them Wednesday morning. What happened during those 12 hours? Wellington's pause was barely noticeable, but Sarah caught it. "I needed time to process what had happened, to be certain the sapphire wasn't simply misplaced." "Of course, may I see the safe?" "I'm afraid that's not possible." "Insurance investigation, you understand?" Sarah nodded but made a mental note. 3 months later and the insurance was still investigating? What about the household staff? Were there others with access? "No. After my wife's death, I reduced staff significantly. Maria was our only live-in employee. But surely there were others. Gardeners, cleaning services, maintenance workers. All bonded, background-checked employees who've worked for my family for years. None had access to my private study." Another deflection. Sarah had spent the morning researching the Wellington household, cross-referencing employment records with court documents. There were at least 6 regular service providers with access to the house, but none had been investigated. "Tell me about the safe combination," Sarah said. "You testified that only you, your late wife, and potentially your children knew it." Wellington's hands stilled on his desk. The children were too young to remember it. 7 years old? That's not so young. Many children that age know phone numbers, addresses, even simple number combinations. They've never shown interest in the safe. But they would know it's important to you. Children notice these things. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Wellington's practiced composure was developing hairline cracks. "Ms. Mitchell, I thought this interview was about security measures, not speculation about my family." "Of course, I'm just trying to understand all the variables." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Where are your children now? At school?" "They're staying with my sister in Connecticut for a few weeks. The trial was difficult for them." That was interesting. Rich kids usually attended private schools that accommodated flexible schedules. Why send them away entirely? "I'd love to speak with them, if possible. Child safety in domestic situations could be an important angle." Wellington stood abruptly. "That won't be happening. My children have been through enough." The interview ended shortly after, but Sarah had what she needed, not answers, but a roadmap of questions that made Charles Wellington deeply uncomfortable. Any mention of his children in relation to Maria Santos caused visible stress responses. Back in her car, Sarah made calls. Connecticut property records showed Wellington's sister didn't own any homes there. The private school the children attended confirmed they'd been withdrawn 2 weeks ago, effective immediately, with no forwarding information provided. Charles Wellington was hiding his children. The question was why. That evening, Sarah drove to the county jail. Visiting hours were nearly over, but she'd called ahead. Maria Santos was smaller than she'd expected, worn down by weeks of imprisonment, but her eyes held an intelligence that impressed Sarah immediately. "Jessica said you might help," Maria said through the phone, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't promise anything, but your case has inconsistencies that bother me." Maria nodded. "The children, they knew something." I saw it in Mr. Wellington's face when he spotted them at the courthouse. Tell me about Emma, Lucas, and Oliver. Really tell me. For the next 30 minutes, Maria painted a picture of 3 children struggling with grief, slowly healing under her care, and deeply attached to the woman now sitting across the plexiglass barrier. But it was the details that intrigued Sarah most. Oliver drew constantly, Maria said. Hundreds of pictures. Mr. Wellington kept them all in a box in his study. What kind of pictures? Everything. Rainbows, butterflies, his family. But also, strange ones. Dark pictures of people crying, houses with no doors, birds in cages. Maria paused. One drawing really bothered me. It showed a woman falling downstairs. When I asked Oliver about it, he said it was Mama's last day. Sarah's pen stopped moving. Their mother died in a car accident. That's what Mr. Wellington always said. But Oliver drew stares, and he drew them over and over. Did you ever ask Mr. Wellington about the discrepancy? Once. He said children process trauma in different ways, that Oliver was just expressing general sadness, not specific memories. Sarah left the jail with her mind racing. Car accident versus falling downstairs. It could be nothing. Children often mixed up details, especially traumatic ones. But combined with Wellington's behavior regarding his children, it painted a troubling picture. The next morning, Sarah requested the death certificate for Catherine Wellington. Car accident, just as Charles had claimed. But death certificates only showed immediate cause, not circumstances leading up to it. She tried a different approach, calling the emergency services dispatcher. I'm researching a story about emergency response times, she explained. Could you provide information about the call to the Wellington estate 2 years ago? The night Catherine Wellington died? The dispatcher was helpful, pulling up the record. Ambulance called to 1247 Birchwood Drive at 11:47 p.m. Caller reported woman had fallen downstairs and wasn't responding. Sarah's blood turned cold. Fallen downstairs? That's right. EMTs arrived to find deceased woman at bottom of main staircase. Husband stated she'd missed a step coming down from second floor. But the death certificate says car accident. Well, yes. She was transported to General Hospital, where they determined she'd sustained injuries consistent with a vehicle collision earlier that evening. The fall down the stairs was secondary to those injuries. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Catherine Wellington had been in a car accident, survived long enough to make it home, then died falling downstairs. But which event had actually killed her? And why would a 7-year-old boy draw his mother's death as falling stairs rather than a car crash? Because that's what he'd witnessed. By 5. Sarah spent the next week digging deeper into the Wellington family history, and what she found painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Charles Wellington's first wife, Margaret, had died in 1998 under mysterious circumstances, officially ruled a suicide by overdose, but friends and family had questioned the finding. Catherine, his second wife, had supposedly died from injuries sustained in a car accident, but the timeline was murky at best. More troubling were the financial records Sarah managed to access through a contact at the bank. Wellington's real estate empire was built on increasingly shaky ground. Over the past year, he'd taken out several high-interest loans using the estate and its contents as collateral. The Beaumont Sapphire wasn't just a family heirloom. It was a $200,000 insurance policy he desperately needed to cash in. But to claim insurance money, the Sapphire had to be stolen, not sold. Sarah's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Emily Hassan, the emergency room physician who'd treated Catherine Wellington, agreed to meet for coffee after Sarah explained she was investigating discrepancies in the case. I remember that night clearly, Dr. Hassan said, stirring her latte thoughtfully. It bothered me then, and it still bothers me now. What specifically? The husband's story didn't match the injuries. He claimed she'd been in a minor fender bender earlier that evening, seemed fine afterward, then fell downstairs at home. But her injuries? Dr. Hassan shook her head. Those weren't from falling downstairs. What do you mean? The head trauma was extensive, but the pattern was wrong. Falls typically cause impact injuries at specific points. Mrs. Wellington had diffuse trauma, more consistent with repeated blunt force impact. Sarah's coffee grew cold as she absorbed the implications. You're saying someone beat her? I'm saying the injuries weren't consistent with the stated cause, but she was declared dead on arrival and the husband was persuasive, very concerned with getting things handled quickly and quietly. Did you report your concerns? I noted them in my medical records, but Mr. Wellington's lawyers made it clear that pursuing alternative theories would be both professionally and personally costly for anyone involved. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, surrounded by printouts, photos, and timelines. The story was becoming clear, but proving it would be nearly impossible. Charles Wellington was a wealthy, connected man who'd successfully buried questions about his wife's death 2 years ago. He certainly wouldn't have trouble discrediting a reporter and an imprisoned housekeeper. But there was one group of witnesses he couldn't silence or discredit: his own children. Emma, Lucas, and Oliver had been in the house the night their mother died. They'd seen something that prompted their father to hide them away whenever Maria's case was discussed. 7-year-olds might not understand complex adult situations, but they remembered what they saw. The problem was finding them. Sarah had exhausted traditional search methods. Wellington's sister in Connecticut didn't exist. The private school had no forwarding information, and Wellington himself had basically vanished from public view since their interview. But children left trails: medical records, prescription databases, educational requirements. The breakthrough came through Oliver's art therapy. After their mother's death, all 3 children had been enrolled in counseling through Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. Dr. Martinez wouldn't discuss her patients, but she was willing to confirm that the Wellington children were no longer in her care. They were transferred to a colleague, she said carefully. Someone who specializes in longer-term residential treatment. Residential treatment meant the children weren't just visiting relatives, they were institutionalized. And there were only 3 facilities in the surrounding states that handled long-term pediatric psychiatric care for wealthy families. Sarah made calls. The first 2 facilities had no record of the Wellington children. The third, Meadowbrook Residential Treatment Center in rural Wisconsin, wouldn't confirm or deny their presence but asked her to hold while they contacted their legal department. That was confirmation enough. The next morning, Sarah drove to Wisconsin. Meadowbrook was a sprawling complex of modern buildings surrounded by woods and carefully maintained gardens. It looked more like an expensive boarding school than a psychiatric facility, which was probably intentional. "I'm here to see the Wellington children," Sarah told the receptionist, gambling that confidence would get her further than deception. "Are you on their approved visitor list?" "I'm investigating their mother's death. It's urgent that I speak with them." The receptionist made a phone call, spoke in hushed tones, then looked back at Sarah with obvious discomfort. "Dr. Morrison will see you in his office." Dr. Morrison was a thin man in his 60s who radiated the kind of professional authority that came from decades of handling difficult situations. "Ms. Mitchell, I understand you're a reporter. I'm afraid our patient's privacy is protected by numerous confidentiality agreements, including agreements that prevent them from talking about witnessing their mother's murder." Dr. Morrison's composure slipped slightly. "That's a very serious accusation. It's a very serious situation. 3 children saw their father kill their mother, and now he sent them away to keep them quiet while an innocent woman rots in prison. Even if what you're suggesting were true, these children are patients undergoing intensive therapy. They're not available for interviews." Sarah leaned forward. "Doctor, I've spent 2 weeks researching this family. Charles Wellington has a history of dead wives and convenient explanations. His financial situation is desperate. His insurance claim on the stolen sapphire is suspicious, and he's hidden his children away from anyone who might ask difficult questions. How long before he decides 3 witnesses are 3 too many?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Finally, Dr. Morrison spoke. "The children arrived here 3 weeks ago with a very specific treatment plan. No outside contact, no questioning about past events, complete isolation from any reminders of their previous life. Their father has been very insistent about these requirements. And you agreed to this? Mr. Wellington is paying for the most expensive care we provide. The children show signs of severe trauma, and his explanation for their condition was plausible." "What explanation?" that they were so attached to their former housekeeper that her arrest and conviction had triggered a psychological crisis. He wanted them kept away from any mention of the case until they could process their feelings of betrayal. It was brilliant, Sarah had to admit. Wellington had used the children's genuine affection for Maria as a cover story for their institutionalization. Any trauma they displayed could be attributed to losing their beloved caregiver, not witnessing their mother's murder. "I need to see them," Sarah said. "That's impossible. Then this whole place is going to be front-page news tomorrow. Wealthy father silences child witnesses to murder. How do you think that will affect your reputation, Doctor?" Morrison stared at her for a long moment, weighing options. Finally, he reached for his phone. "Bring Emma Wellington to my office," he said quietly. 15 minutes later, the door opened, and Sarah's heart broke. Emma Wellington looked like a ghost of the child Maria had described. Her wild curls had been cut short and neat. Her eyes were hollow, and she moved with the careful, measured steps of someone who'd learned that spontaneous movement brought consequences. "Emma," Dr. Morrison said gently, "this lady wants to ask you some questions about Maria." At the mention of Maria's name, Emma's face transformed. Life flickered back into her eyes, and she looked directly at Sarah for the first time. "You know Maria?" Emma whispered. "Yes, sweetheart. I know Maria, and I know she misses you very much." Emma's composure cracked. "Daddy said she was bad, that she stole from us, but Maria would never steal anything. She loved us." "I know she did." "Emma, can you tell me about the night your mommy died? The night with the stairs?" The child went rigid, glancing fearfully at Dr. Morrison. "It's okay," Sarah said softly. "You're safe here. No one can hurt you for telling the truth." Emma's voice was barely audible. "Daddy said never to talk about that night. He said bad things would happen if we told anyone what we saw. But Maria is in trouble because she can't tell the truth about what happened. She needs your help." Emma looked torn, fear warring with love. Finally, she whispered, "Lucas saw it all. He was hiding in the closet, but he stopped talking after Daddy sent us here." "What did Lucas see, Emma?" "Daddy pushing Mommy, Mommy falling down, the blue stone in Daddy's hand. The Beaumont sapphire. Wellington had been holding it the night his wife died." "Emma," Sarah said carefully, "where is the blue stone now?" "Lucas knows. He took it from Daddy's pocket while Daddy was calling the doctors. He was scared Daddy would lose it like he lost Mommy." Sarah's pulse raced. Lucas had the sapphire. A 7-year-old boy had stolen the evidence of his father's crime and hidden it for 2 years. "Where is Lucas now?" "In the quiet room. He won't talk to anyone, but he draws pictures of Maria all the time." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "He misses her so much. We all do." The quiet room turned out to be a padded cell designed for patients experiencing episodes. Lucas Wellington sat in the corner, drawing with crayons on paper scattered around him. Like his sister, he looked fragile, broken, but his hands moved with determined purpose across the paper. Every single drawing was of Maria. Maria reading stories, Maria braiding Emma's hair, Maria helping him build Lego castles, Maria hugging all 3 children at once. Page after page of a child's desperate attempt to keep alive the memory of the only mother figure he'd known since losing his own. "Lucas," Sarah said softly, sitting on the floor near him. "I'm a friend of Maria's." Lucas looked up sharply, his eyes wide and fearful. "She's in trouble, Lucas. She's in jail because people think she stole the blue stone. But you know she didn't take it, don't you?" Lucas nodded frantically, then grabbed a fresh piece of paper. His hands moved quickly, and within minutes he'd drawn a picture of a man, clearly his father, standing over a woman lying at the bottom of stairs. In the man's hand was a blue circle. "You saw Daddy with the stone that night," Sarah said gently. Another nod. "And you took it to keep it safe." Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside, nestled in what looked like a child's handkerchief, was the Beaumont sapphire. He'd been carrying it for 2 years, keeping it safe, keeping the evidence that would prove Maria's innocence and his father's guilt. "Lucas," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "would you like to help Maria come home?" For the first time in weeks, Lucas Wellington smiled. The next 24 hours moved with the speed of an avalanche gathering force. Sarah contacted the FBI, Child Protective Services, and the district attorney's office simultaneously. By evening, Meadowbrook was swarming with federal agents, social workers, and legal representatives. Charles Wellington arrived at midnight, his usual composure completely shattered. He'd driven straight from Chicago the moment Meadowbrook called to inform him of the security breach involving his children. What he found was a coordinated investigation that would destroy his carefully constructed lies. "You can't question my children without my permission," he demanded, confronting Agent Patricia Wells in Dr. Morrison's office. "Actually, we can," Agent Wells replied calmly. "When there's probable cause to believe children have witnessed federal crimes, parental permission isn't required, especially when the parent is the suspected perpetrator." Wellington's mask finally slipped completely. Gone was the grieving widower seeking justice against a thieving servant. In his place stood a desperate man whose world was collapsing. "This is insane. My children are traumatized. They're confused. They don't understand what they think they saw." "Mr. Wellington," Agent Wells said, placing an evidence bag containing the Beaumont sapphire on the desk. "Your son Lucas has been carrying this for 2 years. He drew detailed pictures of the night your wife died, showing you holding this exact piece of jewelry. Either your 7-year-old is running the most sophisticated frame job in criminal history, or you killed your wife and framed your housekeeper for a theft that never occurred." The interrogation lasted 6 hours. Faced with Lucas's testimony, Oliver's drawings, Emma's statements, and the physical evidence he thought he'd successfully hidden, Wellington's story fell apart, piece by piece. Catherine Wellington had indeed been in a minor car accident that evening, but she'd been fine afterward. The argument started when she discovered Charles had been secretly meeting with insurance appraisers about the sapphire. She threatened to expose his financial desperation to their social circle, to ruin the reputation he'd built his business on. "She was going to destroy everything," Wellington said finally, his voice hollow. 20 years of building this empire, and she was going to tear it down over money that was rightfully mine anyway. The sapphire had been in his hand when she fell, or rather, when he pushed her. In the chaos afterward, he'd shoved it into his pocket, focused on creating a story that would satisfy the police. He never noticed that Lucas, hiding in the upstairs closet, had seen everything. Never realized that his quiet, traumatized son had crept downstairs and taken the evidence while Charles was making frantic phone calls. For 2 years, Lucas had carried his mother's murder weapon, too young to understand its legal significance but old enough to know it was important. When Maria was arrested, the boy had wanted desperately to help her, but fear of his father kept him silent. The insurance fraud had been almost an afterthought. When financial pressures mounted and Charles needed to liquidate assets quickly, he remembered the sapphire. But selling it would raise questions about why he hadn't claimed insurance money after his wife's death. Staging a theft solved multiple problems. He could claim the insurance money and redirect suspicion away from his family's past tragedies. Maria had been the perfect fall guy, a woman with financial troubles, access to the house, and no resources to fight back effectively. Even better, her genuine love for his children made her reluctant to say anything that might hurt them further. "I never meant for it to go this far," Wellington said as federal agents placed him under arrest. "I thought she'd take a plea deal, serve a few months, and everyone would move on. Instead, an innocent woman has been in prison for 3 months while you sent your children to a psychiatric facility to keep them quiet," Agent Wells replied coldly. "Somehow, I don't think your intentions matter much to them." The media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. "Millionaire murders wife, frames innocent housekeeper" dominated headlines for weeks. Sarah's reporting won several journalism awards, but she took little satisfaction in the recognition. The real victory was simpler and more profound. On a sunny Tuesday morning, exactly 4 months after her arrest, Maria Santos walked out of county jail into Sophia's waiting arms. The 6-year-old girl launched herself at her mother with such force that they both nearly tumbled to the ground. "Mama, you came back, just like the little bird." Maria held her daughter tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her small body. I promised, didn't I? The little bird always finds her way home. Sophia pulled back to look at her mother's face, her expression suddenly serious. Mama, Mrs. Chen told me you weren't really sick. She said a bad man told lies about you. That's right, baby. But good people found the truth and made everything right again. Like in fairy tales? Maria glanced over Sophia's head to where Emma, Lucas, and Oliver Wellington stood with their new guardian, Catherine's sister, who'd fought for custody the moment the truth came out. The children looked healthier already, color returning to their cheeks, life flickering back in their eyes. Emma stepped forward shyly. Maria, will you come visit us sometime? Our Aunt Sarah says we can have visitors now. I would love that, Maria said, kneeling to their level. All of you. Lucas, who'd barely spoken in months, managed a whispered, I missed you, that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Oliver handed her a drawing he'd made that morning, all of them together under a rainbow, with a little bird flying overhead. The legal aftermath took months to sort out. Wellington was convicted of second-degree murder for his wife's death and multiple fraud charges related to the insurance scam and Maria's false imprisonment. He received a sentence of 25 years to life. Maria's record was expunged, and she received a substantial settlement from Wellington's insurance company. More importantly, the publicity around her case led to job offers from several wealthy families who specifically wanted someone with her integrity and experience. She chose to work for the Morrison family, the same Dr. Morrison who'd initially tried to keep the Wellington children isolated. His guilt over his role in prolonging their suffering had prompted him to offer Maria a position with his own family, complete with excellent benefits and a cottage on his property where she and Sophia could live. 6 months later, Sarah visited Maria at her new home. They sat on the porch watching Sophia play with the Morrison children, while Emma, Lucas, and Oliver visited for the weekend. The triplets were slowly healing, working with new therapists who encouraged them to process their trauma rather than suppress it. Do you ever think about what would have happened if Jessica hadn't written that letter? Sarah asked. Maria considered the question. I try not to. But sometimes late at night I wonder how many other innocent people are sitting in cells right now, waiting for someone to believe them. Maybe that's our next story, Sarah said thoughtfully. Emma came running up to the porch, breathless with excitement. Maria, Lucas wants to know if you'll help us make cookies for the bake sale at our new school. Of course, Maria said, standing up, but only if you promise to help with the measuring. As the children raced inside, chattering about chocolate chips and sprinkles, Maria felt a profound sense of peace. The nightmare was over. The truth had prevailed. And somewhere in the kitchen, the sound of children's laughter was the sweetest music she'd ever heard. The little bird had indeed learned to fly, not just for herself, but for all the lost souls who needed someone to carry them home. Justice, Maria had learned, wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoration, healing, and the courage to speak truth even when the whole world seemed determined not to listen. But most of all, it was about love, conquering fear, and the unbreakable bonds between hearts that choose to protect rather than destroy. In the end, that's what had saved them all. Not the law, not the evidence, not even Sarah's investigation, but 3 children who loved their surrogate mother enough to risk everything to save her. Sometimes, Maria thought as she helped small hands measure flour and sugar, the most powerful force in the world is simply a child's pure heart refusing to let injustice win. And that, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all.